I thought I'd create a video talking about academic writing, as breaking it down to as basic components as I can. I'll be talking about creating the micro elements, the basic ingredients that you lay out in the kitchen when you're assembling and starting to make a meal, all the way through to a complete but simple meal, which is the paragraph. But every piece of academic work begins with searching for material. And I always suggest, particularly if something is brand new to you as a subject, is to start with something big picture, either a review article in Google Scholar or a textbook, which is a particularly good place to look. And even Wikipedia, though that should be a place of almost last resort, or a specialist dictionary can be a good place to start. Basically, what you're looking for here is just to understand the content of what you're looking for, of what you're working on. And then you start to do a more specialized hunt in Google Scholar or a academic library such as the CQU library. And I always go to the advanced search buttons immediately in either Google Scholar or in a library search. So if we have a look here, you can do Boolean phrases or search for all terms. You can fiddle around with these different buttons, but the key button that you should focus on is clicking this one in the CQU library. That will refine your search to only stuff that your lecturer wants you to use, which is the peer-reviewed scholarly journal articles. We do occasionally like you to use scholarly books, but if you want to be really safe and keep your marker happy, click that button and go from there. Now, to find advanced functions in Google Scholar, let me just bring over, here we go. So basically, in Google Scholar, you can press that little triangle and you get that. And you can do all sorts of clever stuff with that. I'll just pull that away. Now, as you can see, you can choose to find whether something's in the title of the article or the body of the article. You can even put a journal. I always just write the word journal in there, so that because almost every journal has got the word journal in it. And I always look for more recent articles, fresh articles, so beyond 2000. And when I'm looking for articles to give me a bit of a conceptual understanding of a field, I write the word review there as well as my other search terms. So review of student nutrition, for example, which is one of the topics that I research. All right, so once you've done that searching, you get lots of academic stuff, and particularly for those of you who English isn't the first language, will be overwhelmed by the content you have to read using very complicated language, lots of jargon, lots of technical terminology. Save yourself a bit of pain by focusing on the abstracts, which is the little bits at the top, or the intro section. But if you want to go a little bit further and get more content, and you can find great articles that are right on the topic, you can dive into the lit review, which is often several more pages into an article. And one of the best places to look is in the conclusion section, where writers tend to roll up their sleeves, sit back and enjoy themselves a bit more and talk about the field in general, problems with the field. And you often get some very good critical thinking from the conclusion section of academic articles. There's another place where I often look, is in the methods section, because when we're looking for critical thinking, and this is a term you'll hear bandied about at university a lot, what we mean by that is not just simply swallowing whole something that's given to you, but because it's written by a professor so-and-so, you think, oh, well, that must be truthful. I get so many students say to me, there are 6 different types of leadership governance, for example, or governance control methods. And I often will put on a comment on their marks, who says so? No one. Only God knows, if there is a God, how many types of leadership styles there really are. It's just a matter of way of looking at it. So Professor Smith says there's 6 different sorts. Now, when I'm talking about the methods section in terms of critical thinking, I'm talking about how they set up these studies. How have they done it? A lot of studies, for example, are done in America or China, and you could, nice, cheap and easy way of critically engaging with that content is saying, well, how appropriate is that content to the Australian context, for example? Or They may have a small sample size or be focused on a particular industry, the car industry in Britain. And you can ask, well, this is very interesting, it's manufacturing, but maybe the car industry doesn't have a lot to say about how pizzas are manufactured. Can the results of this particular study that you're reading speak for another industry or for the whole population? Focus on the sample size, how the sample was selected. So by using some of these techniques, you can come across as looking like someone who is critical. And critical doesn't mean being negative, but saying, I like this study, but it has certain weaknesses in these areas, and I must not take it as the gospel truth. That's what critical thinking basically is. Now, I wanted to focus today on the writing side of things. I recommend that you write portable sentences, or what I call beads first, little bits of sentences. They don't have to be full sentences, they don't have to be good sentences. But make sure that each time you write something of this sort, as a result of reading something, that you reference each bead to a citation. We'll look at that in a minute. And I certainly encourage when you're starting writing to not focus on quality. I tell students who are feeling anxiety about writing, just do a bad job, but don't not do it at all. So just continue to write. So let's have a look at a closer portable sentence. And remember, such things are not perfect. So I actually went and put into Google Scholar the letters A-B space C. And this is what I got, A.B. Carroll. I found an article, first page, three-dimensional conceptual model of corporate performance. It's a 1979 article, and you've got to remember Olaf's rough rule of citing stuff. Don't cite stuff that's older than you are. Of course, for someone of my age, that's not such a good rule, but for the average student, that's probably a good idea. Stick to stuff that's post-2000. But let's say we were to look at this and read it. Whenever I read something, I grab something from it. I never waste my time reading something and just putting it aside. I always use it. And let's just focus on this first few paragraphs. Concepts of corporate social responsibility have been evolving for decades, blah, blah, blah. Have a read of that. Now, I milked out of that a number of portable sentences. Corporate social responsibility has history stretching back to the 1930s. Carroll, 1979. Concepts of CSR have evolved. Carroll, 1979. CSR has a long history. Carroll, 1979. Concepts of CSR changing. Carroll, 1979. All truthful summaries of this little bit. All little bits of sentences that could even be turned into full sentences. Anyway, then I went and had a look at a second thing, looking at corporate social responsibility. Found another article, took a little bit more work, and this one's more modern. I think it's 2000 something, and I've ruined this a little bit, but it's certainly after 2010 because I asked Google search for that. And we'll just have a quick look at this. The high ranking of corporate social responsibility and research agendas appears to be reflected in theoretical and managerial discussions that discuss not only is doing good the right thing, but it also leads to some performance. Improves as a result of CSR. As a result, CSR's moved from ideology to reality. I focused on that. CSR is no longer a speculative possibility, but has become an essential of corporate behaviour. CSR has moved from ideology to reality. That's just two examples that you could milk from that first thing. And remember, when you're doing that, don't use the stuff high ranking on research agendas appears to be reflected. You don't use stuff that's directly quoted to someone else because you have to reference that to those guys, not to Lindgren and Swain. However, they're summarising the literature in this particular way, so you can use their summary in your portable sentences. And also, CSR has moved from ideology to reality. They say that, so you can reference that to them. Okay, so you create these tiny little sentences and you make sure you reference them, and if it's a direct quote, you put a page number with it. That's important. So then you've got these 6 pieces of ingredients out on the kitchen table. You're about to make a meal. And the meal that we're going to make is a simple meal. It's a sentence. Now, the ideal sentence contains at least 2 references, and the ideal sentence does what we call comparing and contrasting some of these beads, as I call them. You could create a single sentence out of any one of these. So let's take this one. CSR is no longer a speculative possibility of becoming a central corporate failure. Well, we could just put a full stop there, and that is a whole sentence. Or we could combine it. concepts of CSR have evolved. However, CSR is no longer a speculative possibility. It's going to essential blah, blah, blah. That would be a very boring sentence. Have a look at a more interesting one, which I prepared earlier. While our understanding of corporate social responsibility has evolved, the debate has moved from mere speculation to implementation, with Lynn Green arguing that the debate has moved from ideology to reality. Or we could say Lynn Green and Swain arguing, without a page number, that the researchers in the field generally agree that CSR has bottom line value, whereas earlier on it was more a theoretical debate. Now, there's another great source of portable part sentences, Academic Phrase Bank from the University of Manchester. Google that, look at that. These are cliches, academic cliches, and I'll make a comment about Olaf's law of academic cliches. There's no academic cliches, just non-academic writing. So don't use like absolutist phrases. So I recommend using critical phrases, and they've got a whole section on that. A major criticism, one question, a serious weakness, one of the limitations, one criticism, a key problem. This is the kind of language you should use. Don't use things like so-and-so is a famous author in the field. That's a value judgment. So the other thing that you should use is being cautious. Don't use absolutist phrases like, you know, there are 6 different ways of expressing emotional intelligence. You always say, according to Smith, there are 6 different ways of expressing emotional intelligence, or whatever. It's believed that, it is thought that. Don't use phrases like, the best method of leadership is transformational leadership, for example. Who says so? Or even phrases that sound like they're what we would call apple pie phrases. It's obvious that. It's obvious that leadership is important for profitability of a company. And I'll write onto it as a marker. I'll say, I don't think it's that obvious. I bet I can find someone who disagrees with you, probably an academic, but maybe even half the population disagrees with you. So don't use that kind of phrases because it opens you up to criticism. Not good criticism either. Remember to cite everything. Try and learn something like EndNote, which is available freely through the university, most universities. And remember to pin every sentence, every bullet point, every bead, every idea to someone, to a reference. Now, I will skip this bit about citations because I'd like to focus on what you do with these little chunks or beads. One of the most common problems with academic writing is that people hopscotch all over the place. I read a bit here and then 6 paragraphs later I'm reading the same subject and I don't see the linkage between the two. One of the great things about these portable sentences is that you can sort them like beads into colours. You can do that in Word quite easily, cut and paste. There's other methods, more advanced methods you can use to shuffle stuff into themes. By having these little chunks, you can sort them more easily into these same coloured beads, so to speak, and you can begin to see themes emerging. And when you've done this sorting of all this material, you can then start thinking about, before you start writing, you think, okay, how am I going to structure this in a way that's logical and easy for the reader to get? Now, one of the methods of doing that, of course, is the paragraph. You put all stuff relating to one theme into a paragraph. You don't have 6 different topics in the one paragraph. That's the nature of a paragraph. It's a bundle of similarly coloured beads, so to speak. But it's important with good quality paragraphs. What we often see with students is they will milk a particular author or scholar dry, grab a whole lot of content from one scholar and put that into one paragraph, grab another content from a scholar, summarise that in another paragraph, and so on and so forth. You even see this at PhD level, and it's not good. What you should be looking for is like a sultana cake. A paragraph should be like a slice of sultana cake or fruit cake, where you've got all the different kinds of fruit visible when you slice it open. It's a mix of things. You don't want all cherries in one slice. You want to have a little bit of cherries, a little bit of sultanas, a little bit of dates, or whatever, mixed into the one slice. So the paragraphs should all have a single flavour, like a single topic, but they should come from different sources, different authors, and different publications. That's more what we would call the ideal paragraph. And remember, As you're writing, you go back to the Google Scholar and find more content because you think, oh, I'm missing something here. Yeah, remember, you always write, you cite. You write and then you search and you shuffle stuff around as much as possible to produce a nicely ordered, nicely structured piece of work. I hope that makes sense.